Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us bright and early for the first Wake Up with Research series of 2023. I'm Daryl DeWald. I'm Executive Vice President for Health Sciences, and I'm Chancellor of WSU Spokane. We're excited to be back with you. Things are moving full steam ahead on campus with the start of our semester. Our students were back on campus January 9th after a much-needed holiday break. I want to begin this morning with our land acknowledgement of America's First Peoples. Washington State University acknowledges that its locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original and current caretakers of the region. As an academic community, and as a leader in the community, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with the tribal nations and Native peoples in support of tribal sovereignty and their inclusion of their voices in teaching, research, and programming at Washington State University. For those who haven't joined us before, we started this research series in 2021. To share and highlight our research with community members. We did this virtually during the pandemic, and we learned that many people like the early morning format. Because of that, we decided to continue some of our series virtually, while others are now in person. Our goal is to provide you with a backdrop to learn more about the research that's happening, not only right here in Spokane, but across the WSU system and the entire state. Our researchers are making important contributions in many fields. Studies of research range from sleep and performance, to addictions, to cancer, to chronic disease, and neurological diseases. The list is extensive and way beyond what I've described. All of this research is looking at complex and life-changing problems that will ultimately enrich the quality of life for me and for all of you. I'm now going to turn things over to our MC this morning, Dr. Celestina Barbosa-Leiker. Celestina serves as our Executive Vice Chancellor for Research and Administration at WSU Spokane, as well as a professor in the College of Nursing. She's a distinguished researcher herself. She's a member and a leader in the Washington State Academy of Sciences. Celestina has been a key part in guiding this team as we continue our Wake Up with Research series. Celestina.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President and Chancellor Daryl DeWald. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this morning, bright and early again, once again, for our Wake Up with Research. I am thrilled to be with you, and we have a fantastic panel of speakers on the topic of climate change and your health, and I know we are all excited to get to them. Before I introduce our speakers today, I do want to touch on what got us here, and that is that Washington State University is a land-grant university, and the way that we serve our state in the health sciences is through education of the state's future workforce, service to the communities and organizations that serve our healthcare needs, and research that works to improve the health and well-being of every resident in the state of Washington. Our topic this morning is climate change and your health, a topic that I know that is critical and timely for our WC researchers to be dedicating their time to. Our research at Washington State University is seen across our state, and you'll be able to see it this morning when you hear more about our panel of speakers here that are coming to us from WSU Spokane, including IREACH in Seattle, WSU Vancouver, and WSU Pullman. Referencing the statewide approach, we note that WSU Health Sciences research is being done across the state of Washington and beyond. We also have clinical sites and partnerships across our state in both rural and urban settings. Before we begin, I want to remind all of you that you can ask questions at any time using the Q&A button down there at the bottom of your screen. And we will be sure to ask your question here live at the end when all of our panelists are done with their presentations. There's no need to wait though. You don't have to wait and try to remember it. You can put it right in that chat box there and we'll make sure. I know some of you have already submitted questions, so we'll go ahead and get to those too after our presenters have time to share their research. So let's go ahead and get started because I know you're all here to hear about climate change and health and to meet our fantastic researchers. So we are going to start today with Dr. Singh. She is an assistant professor, Dr. Deepti Singh, in the School of the Environment, College of Art and Sciences at WSU Vancouver. Dr. Singh.
Thanks, Celestine. I'm going to try to share my screen here real quick. Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share our work. So my research group kind of mainly focuses on extreme weather events, which you've probably all heard of or experienced. And there are different types of extreme events in the climate science community. We refer to them as conditions that cause damage or cross certain thresholds. There are lots of different types of extreme events depending on where you live. Here, for example, we have extreme heat, droughts, wildfires in the West. But in other parts of the US, there are different types of extreme events that affect communities. And this is a figure from NOAA that shows that in 2022, there were about 18 of these extreme events that had economic damages and losses exceeding $1 billion. So this was just in one single year. And this is about the average number of what we call billion-dollar weather disasters that are happening. We have about 18 of them in the last 5 years. That's the average number of events that are happening. And cumulatively, their total damage of just these 18 events was about $165 billion. So that's about the third largest in terms of damages since record keeping began in about 1980s. So these extreme events, obviously affect life. They have economic damages, affect infrastructure. But one of the important consequences of these increasing extreme events is their impact on our health. So extreme events are affecting the quality of our food, water, as well as the air we breathe, and the conditions we experience, like the extreme heat conditions, for example. And these are affecting our health in a number of ways. They're affecting individual health. They're affecting our respiratory system, our cardiovascular system. If you've lived here in the Pacific Northwest and you've been exposed to the wildfire smoke, a lot of people have reported increases in the incidence of asthma during exposure to wildfire smoke. And of course, heat has some pretty important consequences. It's actually one of the deadliest weather disasters in the US. But in addition to these kind of individual impacts on our individual health, these changes in extreme events can also affect community level health and our mental health, as well as this community level health. And one of the projects that we're doing with a few of the other panelists here is actually on migration to the Pacific Northwest, and because of climate change related issues in other parts of the world. So if you want to talk about that, I won't be talking about it today, but if you're interested in that, please don't hesitate to reach out. What I want to talk about today is two different types of extreme events that my research group has been focusing on. The first one is on extreme heat. And before I tell you what's happening, I want to explain to you why this is happening. So you've probably heard that, global temperatures are warming. This schematic here basically shows us what happens to extreme temperatures as the climate warms. So this distribution here shows us, for example, the distribution of temperature. And so this hump here, is basically the average temperatures that we experience most frequently. And these temperatures in the tails are the extreme temperature events. So as the climate warms, we see a shift in this. We see more extreme events happening, more extreme heat, less extreme cold events. So this is one of the basic ways in which climate change is affecting us, by increasing the likelihood of these extreme heat events. The other change that's happening is that as the climate warms, there is more moisture available in the atmosphere. The atmosphere, what we call, has a higher moisture holding capacity. So for every 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature, the atmosphere can hold about 4% more moisture, which means there's increased humidity and there's increased precipitation. So heavier snowfall, heavier rainfall. And so these are two kind of basic changes that are happening to temperature and humidity. And if you've been to the Southwest, you'll know that, temperature, heat, and humidity are kind of a deadly combination. Humidity increases the heat stress that we feel from high temperatures. And this, one of the ways in which we measure this combination of heat and humidity is through something called the wet bulb temperature. And this temperature, this metric, has a very clear threshold. So above 28 degrees in wet bulb temperatures, we start to experience pretty severe heat-related illnesses. And if you're exposed to wet bulb temperatures of above 35 degrees for a prolonged period of time without any external cooling, that can be fatal. One of the examples of that here in the US is the Chicago heat wave in 1995, where wet bulb temperatures were about 28 or 29 degrees Celsius. This is different. So this is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, in terms of heat stress, heat index, which you might have heard of, is about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's this combination of heat and humidity resulted in over 500 deaths in Chicago in 1995. And there are many places in the world that are experiencing temperatures exceeding this threshold. And so these humid heat conditions are largely a risk to elderly people, to people that work outdoors, agricultural workers, construction workers, and there are large parts of the world where we're already reaching temperatures that are that pose health hazards to communities. And so our recent research showed that these humid heat events are increasing, particularly in areas where temperatures are already at these thresholds, which is basically large parts of Asia where close to 2 billion people, more than 2 billion people live, parts of Africa, parts of South America, and in the US here in the along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, humid heat is a major concern even now, and we're seeing an increase in the number of days exceeding these high thresholds. So everywhere that you see red colors without a dot, those are areas where we see significant increases. And in some areas, for example, in India, where I grew up, there are about 7 to 10 more days per decade with temperatures exceeding these extreme thresholds. And if we kind of look across the entire world, we're seeing that the number of people exposed to these humid heat conditions, that's shown by this blue line here, is increasing at a faster rate than just to dry heat or like extreme temperatures alone. So humid heat is becoming an important heat risk. It's something that's harder to adapt to than just high temperatures. And it is a major health risk to a number of vulnerable communities around the world, including here in the US. But here in the Western US, we have the opposite problem, right? We don't have high humidity. We have actually drier conditions. And so we have another problem, which is wildfires. That's because of warmer temperatures as well as increasing aridity. So we have as temperatures are warming, the Western US is becoming drier, and also because of changes to the snowpack, we are seeing increases in the risk of wildfires. We are seeing larger fires burn across larger regions because of increasing temperature, warmer temperatures, and increasing drying of the Western US. And a consequence of that for our health is the exposure to the smoke from wildfires, which is extremely harmful. There's work that shows that the smoke from wildfires can affect developmental health, it can affect cardiovascular health, it can affect our system in many different ways. And there's still the research about what the actual health impacts of the smoke are still emerging, because we are in the Western US are being exposed to higher levels of this toxic smoke, and the composition of the smoke even is kind of a puzzle to scientists right now, and there are campaigns to try to study that. So we don't fully understand all the impacts of health, but we know it's bad. And I want to show you this image from 2020, where we had fires burning across California, Oregon, and Washington. And this dark red color here shows the smoke emanating from those fires. And we can see that the smoke basically was transported all the way to the eastern US. So it's not just the impacts, the health impacts of the smoke are not just locally to the communities that are directly exposed, but also it is affecting, it is people like remote, far away from these fires are also being impacted. So my student recently looked at two health pollutants. One is air pollutants. One is the particulate matter, PM 2.5, which is particulate matter smaller than 2.5 micrometers, and surface ozone. Both of these are associated with impacts on human health. And we looked at how often these two extremes in particulate matter and surface ozone are occurring. So in the Western US here, everywhere that is shown in red with a dot on it, that indicates that we are seeing significant increases in the co-occurrence of particulate matter and surface ozone. So we're not just being exposed to one harmful air pollutant, we're exposed to multiple extreme levels of multiple harmful air pollutants more often. And we're seeing larger geographic areas being affected. So this is basically showing us the maximum area in the Western US that is being simultaneously affected by smoke and by these two specific air pollutants, and that is increasing. And in 2020, there was about close to 70% of the Western US was simultaneously being affected to these two health hazards. And we showed that this is because of the increasing occurrence of large and severe wildfires. And we also showed that this is because of increasing severity of heat. So both heat as well as wildfires are both required to contribute to these increases in the co-occurrence of these two air pollutants. So that's kind of a brief summary of some of the research that we're doing. We're continuing this work on fires, on extreme heat. And as I mentioned briefly, we're also we've recently started a project on climate-related migration within the Pacific Northwest as well as to the Pacific Northwest. And this is the team of researchers in my group that are behind this work. I've listed my website here, and you can find me on Twitter at Climate Chirper. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them after the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepti. Thank you for sharing your research and really giving us a great overview of everything that you and your team of researchers are working on. And thank you for joining us from WSU Vancouver. Shout out to all the Vancougs that are watching us this morning. Thanks so much for being with us. So our next presenter is Dr. Claire Richards. Dr. Richards is an assistant professor in the College of Nursing, and her research topic that she's going to be sharing with us this morning is energy insecurity and human health. Claire.
Hi, Celestina. Let me just get the slides up. Okay. All right. So thank you, Celestina. It's a pleasure to join all of you this morning. I'm going to share a slice of my research with you that is broadly related to energy insecurity and human health. There are multiple forms of energy insecurity, and specifically what I'm discussing here is acute energy insecurity related to power outages or power shutoffs. And I really appreciate the context that Dr. Singh just set up to my work. There are multiple forms of acute energy insecurity related to power outages or power shutoffs. I'll share a bit with you on 2 research studies that I'm conducting. The first is a study funded by the Washington State University New Faculty Seed Grant, and the second is a 4-year study funded by the National Science Foundation, Navigating the New Arctic, that we are just starting. So for background, research has shown that power outages have negative health impacts, including morbidity and mortality, and there have been worse effects with more widespread power outages. So research using data collected by the Energy Information Administration has shown that major power outages affecting more than 50,000 customers have risen nationally. Causes of power outages include aging infrastructure, increase in population, and environmental hazards related to climate destabilization, such as storms, supply-demand balance related to extreme heat and need for air conditioning, as well as wildfire prevention activities involving power shutoffs. Research and media reports have also suggested that there are disproportionate impacts of unplanned sustained outages on communities of color and low-income communities, but there are not many well-done studies on this topic because of some real methodological challenges. Coordination between utilities and public health departments have broken down in some cases, resulting in delays in response to outages, putting people's health at risk. Additionally, most research is focused on single large-scale power outages, and little is known about the relationship between smaller scale outages in rural areas. Little is known about the joint exposure to power outages and extreme heat or wildfire and wildfire smoke. So this is a simplification of the relationship between climate change and power outages and their health impacts. There are many more relationships than just these, but the general idea is that climate destabilization results in environmental hazards such as extreme temperatures that increase the likelihood of power outages, and then power outages can amplify the effects of those hazards. This is what we might call compounding effects of climate change. And there are a variety of reasons, but ultimately utilities have sometimes turned to turning power off, which are also called de-energizations, when there are wildfire conditions like the low humidity and wind that Dr. Singh mentioned to prevent utility poles from being the cause of the wildfire. So one of the studies that I'm working on is the one that was funded by the New Faculty Seed Grant, is describing the association of county level vulnerability with outage data availability and also outage burden in Washington State. So this entails articulating a bit of what outage burden looks like, and tries to address at least a gap in outage availability. So the outage data that is publicly available is through the Energy Information Administration, and it's only for large power events, outage events for large utilities, because they, by definition, involve outages affecting more than 50,000 electric meters. So it is biased towards urban rather than rural areas. So we use data from poweroutage.us, which collects data directly from utility websites as the outages actually unfold. And it has county level information, and it is commonly cited by the media during outage events. The actual analysis of this data is very complex, so I'll share a little bit of findings with you. You can see that there is different coverage of the outage data on the left, with some counties having absolutely no outage data available via the poweroutage.us data set. The actual availability of the data is highly associated with less, with basic poverty and the social and health vulnerability. So the more vulnerable those counties are, the less likely they are to have outage data available. On the right side, you can see the preliminary results of the outage burden across counties. And what you can see is that there is an increase in outages over the study period. At the same time, there is also an increase in heat. And we are working on the analysis related to the actual outage burden with vulnerability metrics, and we'll be completing that work this spring, and also layering on continuing to analyze the heat and wildfire smoke in relationship with the power outages. So another study that I'm involved in is a 4-year project kicking off this year called Foundations for Improving Resilience in the Energy Sector Against Wildfire in Alaska Lands, Firewall. This is an interdisciplinary project involving wildfire science, electrical engineering, health sciences, and energy and health policy across multiple institutions to address the increase in high intensity wildfires in Alaska and the risk to the Alaskan energy infrastructure and communities. The goal of the project is to develop a risk-informed decision-making platform for a case study area in Alaska that integrates formation, short-term prediction, and spatial temporal propagation analysis of wildfires on Alaskan lands. That's not my part of the project. Alaska's electricity network planning, preparedness, response, and mitigation for wildfires, and community health and social vulnerability. Another goal of the project is to learn how to enable a collaborative framework for decision-making and communication among multi-sectoral stakeholders to reduce risks faced by communities and electric companies. So the sub-team that I'm involved in is related to the social environment. We are working to describe the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders, including electric utilities, first responders, and emergency management, and engaging community members and tribes among other stakeholders that we hope to identify as our research continues. We will also interview stakeholders about their experiences with wildfire and power outages and what their perceptions are of health and social vulnerability, and to identify relevant sources of secondary data. Based on what we learn from our stakeholders, we may integrate that health and social vulnerability into the decision-making platform or explore other ways to share the health and vulnerability information with stakeholders. Throughout the course of the project, we'll be working to develop a collaborative framework among stakeholders and are working with our experts here at Ruckelshaus Center to design an engagement strategy. Some examples of potential agreements could be like sharing of equipment to decrease fuel load or developing memorandums of agreement to share backup generators in case of power outages. We anticipate that there are many opportunities to discuss how information is shared and believe that these discussions in advance will reduce the risks to human health. So thank you very much. And my email is here. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much, Clara. Thanks for representing WSU Health Sciences Spokane campus. Thank you very much. And thank you for your work focusing on power outages in vulnerable populations. That's such a critical area to be dedicating your research towards. So thank you very much. So continuing along with folks from WSU Health Sciences Spokane. We're gonna head over across the state to Seattle, even though he's here in Spokane with us. Next up is Dr. Gary Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson is a faculty and director of outreach and engagement for the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health, otherwise known as IREACH. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Gary.
Good morning, and Kila Mekamna in the Indigenous language that I come from. I'm Gary Ferguson. I'm really honored to talk to you about climate change and some of the work we're doing in Indigenous communities here in the Pacific Northwest. And of course, as has been shared, we are also working in Alaska and across the nation in addressing climate change and what we can do in our communities to respond and be more resilient to the climate change threats. So I was honored to be a part of the Climate Change Hackathon here at Washington State University, where the Office of Research sponsored a gathering of scientists and researchers who want to step into this space. It was an amazingly inspiring gathering where I was really stimulated by the thought process around what can we actually do and bringing together multiple angles as far as addressing climate change. And as far as new research ideas, there were several that were shared already that I'm also getting to contribute to, but one of them in particular is related to really engaging our Indigenous communities. As a land-grant institution, Washington State University really wants to make sure that our priority is with our Pacific Northwest tribes. And here in Washington State, we've got a lot of engagement with tribal nations related to climate change. I'm Alaska Native, I'm Woonunga or Aleut, originally from the Aleutian region, and my research and my work in the past has been in engaging our Alaska Native communities. As you probably know already, Alaska is on the forefront of climate change, dramatic changes in our communities. The region I'm from, we just had one of the most vigorous storms that we've had since recorded history. And we're starting to see other changes related to climate change with permafrost and disruptions to animal migration cycles and food systems. There's a lot of changes underway. And so Native communities have been coming together to address what we can do and how can we be resilient from policy changes. Here in the slide, I'm talking about the Alaska Federation of Natives has been coming together to say, this is important to us. We need to address the threats to our food system, to our transportation, to our infrastructure. And I was honored to work at the Alaskan Tribal Health Consortium for 10 years, where we have the Center for Climate and Health. One of the notable programs that was developed was a local environmental observer program there, which it was amazing as it has expanded across the country to look at key informant real-time input to monitoring climate change and responding to climate change. And one of the initiatives within the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, where I was just at a conference here in Portland, where tribal leaders continue to gather here in the Pacific Northwest to really look at what we can do to address climate change and how can we respond. As we look at the impacts of climate change to our Indigenous communities, many of our Indigenous communities are taking a disproportionate hit, whether it be flood insurance or other ways that folks have been able to recoup some of the damages. Many of our communities don't have as many of those assets. And so our Native communities have been hit especially hard. That said, tribal nations are leading many of these efforts, and I'm really excited to be a part of that as an Indigenous person, but also working with the amazing Indigenous wisdom that has existed for thousands of years as we've been responding to climate change as Indigenous nations. So I'm going to speak a little bit to a project that came out of the climate change hackathon, which I'm really excited to share with other team members, Dr. Karen Sanguinet, Dr. Andres Spartenko, Carol McFarland, Stephanie Blair, Tracy Morgan, Dr. Shannon Tushingham, and Dr. Ani Jayakaran. Along with, we brought on Dr. Zoe Hagel-Strong. So we have Inez Pierce, tribal member who's also working with us here in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm excited to see this project continue to expand, and it's in its infancy at this point. And I think rightly so. As we look at engaging our Indigenous communities, we want to come to them with research ideas that also make sure that their wisdom and their input helps us lead the way. In the end, we want to make sure that whatever our priorities to our Indigenous peoples here in the Pacific Northwest get the right place in our research initiative. And so this is called Forest Gardens. Our goals are to address the impacts of climate change on our planet through advancing environmental resiliency of plant communities. So we're focusing in on food systems and medicine, food security and sovereignty, urban greening and water management, and really looking to see that our research is in agreement with Indigenous knowledge and traditional practices, and making sure that the tribal nations that have existed on this land for thousands of years And the wisdom that comes from those tribal nations is up front and center. So our goal is to engage Indigenous wisdom, preserve traditional food and medicine security, promote food sovereignty, and build climate resilience. I'm really excited to say so far we've been received well, and this project is really based upon some of the work that was done in looking at forest gardens that have existed for many years. And in the Pacific Northwest, the forest garden concept, or the forest is our garden, is something that you'll see throughout the country as tribal nations have tended and cared for forests as a place of food, resources, and also medicine. I'm a naturopathic physician by training, and it's really exciting to see the resurgence of interest in Indigenous medicines and traditional ways of knowing and healing. And so that's also a part of this as we engage our young people to understand how to gather and grow their own food. These forest gardens, as this concept is developed, ideally will be to scale based upon population, and we'll engage our Native communities to see about being more resilient in climate change, both the wet times, as Dr. Singh has shared, and also the dry times, because we're seeing such a fluctuation and dramatic weather changes. And happy to talk more. If you're a stakeholder, one of our tribal nations that's out there, please reach out. We'd love to talk story with you. This is, again, a research project that is just getting going, and we're looking forward to expanding it and really making sure that we're in line with the wisdom and the oversight by our Pacific Northwest tribes. Kagasakuk, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ferguson. That was wonderful. And thank you especially for really highlighting and grounding us this morning in always thinking to honor and respect and listen to Indigenous wisdom. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your work and sharing that with us this morning. Just a quick reminder for folks, if you have questions, feel free to just drop them in the Q&A. Down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be sure to get to all the questions, or as many as we can, as soon as we're done with all of the panelists here. So with that, we have our last panelist this morning coming to us from WSU Pullman, the Pullman campus. Dr. Ann Piser is an assistant professor in WSU's Department of Anthropology and is here with us this morning. Ann, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about an initiative that is WSU based in collaboration with a nonprofit in Spokane, Urbanova. And this is an app that we are calling Climb2. So before I get to the app, let me give you a little bit of background. So continuing on themes from what we've heard today, we know in the state of Washington that the impacts of climate change just keep coming. Whether we are on the east side of the state and have experienced, for example, the impacts of the heat dome in Spokane, also, of course, felt very much on the west side as well, or even on the west side where we have roads regularly washed out by inundations from large storms. We're really feeling both the impacts on our health and well-being of climate change, but also on things like our infrastructure and on our homes and livelihoods. So at COP27, an international meeting focused on climate change last fall, the UN Secretary General said, we need progress in adaptation in order to reinforce our resilience to climate change. And what he means here by adaptation is basically the management of risks posed by climate change, whether that's to our health or to our everyday lives in some other form. Now, the problem is, right, is if we're going to focus on climate change adaptation, where should we begin? So to quote from a recent review from Nature Climate Change from a journal, there's basically stark inadequacy of current methods and evidence available to assess the effectiveness of responses in terms of risk reduction. So when we're thinking about adaptations, which ones to fund, which ones to prioritize, how we should be working with communities to foster these, we actually know very little about which adaptations are effective and where and under what conditions. And further, we need data on the durability of adaptations. So once they're actually in place, do they last? Do they persist? And how long does it take for their benefits to accrue, and to whom do they accrue? So thinking about climate justice, who actually gets to benefit from adaptations once they're in place? So in short, we have this big lack of information about what works and for whom and where. When we're, for example, trying to deal with energy shortages and cuts, right? Thinking about things like Claire mentioned with respect to generators, how can those solutions actually be implemented? Who are they benefiting? And where would they work well? So thinking about these adaptations and how they would persist is pretty key. So how do we get data on whether adaptations reduce risk and for how long? And how do we do this at scale? So the first thing to do is to engage communities. The data we do have suggests that grassroots solutions, that is, candidate adaptations that communities come up with for responding to climate change, are often very effective at managing this risk and are effective at persisting across time too. They tend to last and they tend to continue to reduce that risk. So this is a figure from a paper of mine that came out last year, focusing on how we can actually work with communities to support their autonomy to adapt to climate change. And one of the key things from this paper is the importance of supporting connections between communities where they can share innovations with one another in terms of ideas for how to respond, and also share those ideas with organizations, for example, nonprofits that want to actually support community adaptation and community-based adaptation. So building those connections is really key, we think, to responding to climate change going forward. Second, we need the right tool. So we need a tool to gather these data at scale, right? How effective are our adaptations? In what context do they persist? We need a tool that takes users and grassroots solutions seriously, given there's a lot of promising evidence that they can work really well. We need a tool that collects data pertinent to research as well, so that has climate-focused research in mind, both across time and at scale. And further, it would be great to have a tool that can actually help funders identify how to best support grassroots adaptation. So this is where the Climb2 project comes in. So Climb2 is a smartphone app. It's called Climate Together. We call it Climb2 for short. And it's focused on community climate science. So that is putting climate tools in the hands of community members and enabling them to actually build those connections with one another. So for example, to give you a taste of how the app will work, by taking grassroots solutions seriously, what Climb2 does is it actually has three main foci, three main features. So one is to support learning, one is to support discussion, and one is to support engagement. So I'm going to show you some screenshots from the prototype we're developing for the app. And here you can see, for example, on the learning screen, what Climb2 does is it actually provides a clearinghouse, a one-stop shopping for folks to come in and get information from trusted sources about what the latest suggestions are for adaptation coming from, say, the UN, right? Or coming from other large international organizations. Additionally, from local trusted researchers based, for example, at WSU. Then discussion on app happens when folks can actually connect with each other, talk about the solutions they're working with. So for example, when it comes to actually planting plants that might be resilient to climate change and thinking about what that might look like, you might see a conversation like this one happening about drought-resistant plants in the state of Washington. And then finally, what Climb2 also does is gives people the opportunity to engage. So to actually get involved in projects, for example, that are focused on mitigation or adaptation. Additionally, to actually become involved in climate-focused research. And this is where researchers also become part of the platform. So Climb2 collects data across time and at scale, and it does this in a few different ways. The first thing that's really key is that it collects data with an eye to privacy. We're researchers, right? This is an app that is going to be a nonprofit, so we're not actually looking to make money with this. So what we would really like to see is transparent permissions where people know exactly what data they're sharing with researchers and can control that and change that at any time. On app, we're actually able to deploy surveys, so we can ask folks how they recently responded to a big climate event like a drought or wildfire season. And additionally, we can ask about the kinds of adaptations they are using in their everyday lives. And then finally, researchers can actually apply to our scientific board, right? This is in process. We haven't formed it yet, but this is the game plan. And then what happens is that researchers can actually be approved or not approved to actually access these back-end data to see how folks are responding to climate change. So what we're actually enabling researchers to do through the app as well is whether it's sharing information on the Learn component of the platform, or whether it's connecting directly with users to ask permission for data use. We're actually building those connections not only between communities, but also between the research community and stakeholders in Washington state and beyond. So where are we now in the process of building Climb2? We are currently building the prototype for this app. We've been talking to focus groups throughout the state about Climb2 and getting their feedback. And based on that, we're building this user interface, what the app would actually look like, with Urbanova, again, based in Spokane, and with Sonoma Tech, based in the Bay Area. We're pursuing funding. So thanks to a generous funding from WSU Climate Change Hackathon, which Gary also mentioned. This seed grant's actually covering the building of this prototype, but we're looking to actually scale the app up and actually get it there on your app store so you can download it. And additionally, we're building connections with researchers and with stakeholders across Washington and beyond to help build those connections through the platform as it is designed, as it is released, and as it grows. So if you yourself have interest, for example, in Climb2, whether it's as a potential early adopter, if you'd like to give us feedback on what you would like to see, even if you know a potential funder, we would love to hear from you. And on that note, if you'd like to learn more about Climb2, about our project, you can find us at climb2.org. The QR code is also right there. You can also feel free to reach out to me at my email address at WSU or on Twitter. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Anne. Thank you for sharing your research with us. And now it is time for all of our panelists to come back on screen here. So we have time now for our Q&A. So we've got some great questions that came in early ahead of time, and we have some great questions that have shown up while all of you are presenting. So let's just jump right in there. The one that I just saw that I think is great to start off here. Gary, this one is from you, from a great colleague in nursing here. It says, I'm curious what kinds of traditional wisdom might help in keeping forests less prone to wildfires. Are practices, for example, forest thinning, logging, in alignment with traditional wisdom?
So yes, yes, and yes. So I would say tribal nations here in the Pacific Northwest, I know the Yurok Nation in California also have gotten some of their ideas shared in the wisdom as far as forest thinning, controlled burns. I mean, all of that wisdom is now being recognized as really important now. As we see the increased wildfires, there's been thousands of years of tending to our forests by tribal nations, and this wisdom is now being recognized as something that is a priority. So I would say I'm excited to see it happen, and it's about time. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Claire, there's a question here. I think you're probably the best one to answer this question. It's about the attacks on the power grids. And just curious your thoughts about that and how it's impact your research or other information that we know. And then a kind of a follow-up to that is, what do you see as the biggest barriers for helping vulnerable folks during power outages?
Yeah, so one of the most vulnerable populations to power outages are people who depend on electricity for their medical equipment. And so research has shown worse impacts on those populations. But I think what the attacks on the electric infrastructure show is that as the climate warms, like, we are all going to become dependent. If our primary adaptation to climate change is air conditioning, we all become dependent on electricity. And so if there is a large scale event and the power is lost, and that's our primary mode of protecting our health and well-being is through electricity, then we can jeopardize our own well-being. And I think it's a maladaptive strategy. And I think it also is important to consider that heat, especially the riskiest part of climate change for health, has the worst impacts, and that communities that have been historically redlined have much higher temperatures due to more impervious surfaces and parking lots and buildings that retain heat and less tree canopy, right? So those communities in particular are more at risk, and it's very important to consider that this is the strategy to protect human health in that context. It crosses all systems of our society, to reducing economic inequality, to addressing our emergency management systems, but also I think that we need to be thinking about how can we both slow climate change down and adapt. So like microgrids and solar panels are a really good strategy. And also improving people's housing. So I think that it's, there was a second part of your question.
About the barriers. Although I do want to say really quick, Claire, you kind of touched on this. Another question from someone else was about housing codes and lack of insulation, and that needed, and it sounds like, yes, we need better codes, we need better insulation, things like that to protect against heat.
Yes, and landscaping as well, using our natural systems to reduce climate change impacts. But yes, in terms of I think one of the biggest barriers that I face in my work is related to the lack of outage data. And this has been an issue that has gone up to like the White House levels of asking utilities to share information about outage data, but there's a lack of real granular data across time and also high quality data where we can actually like find communities that are most at risk. Because as you can see, those counties and areas that have higher levels of poverty, there's less data. So how do we prepare those communities for outages if we can't even measure them right now?
Great, thank you so much. That was really surprising to see how much missing data on power outages there were, and that link to where that missing data is across our state. Thank you. Deepti, talk to us about the 2021 heat wave that we experienced, and what tools do climate scientists have in predicting these types of significant events?
Yeah, that was a really exceptional event. And we're actually seeing events like that, like these really what we call record-shattering events happening across the world. The 2021 heat wave was definitely a surprise for scientists, but it wasn't unexpected because, as I showed, as climate warms, we do see an increase in the likelihood of extreme temperatures. And there are studies that came out after that 2021 heat wave that showed that, basically those temperatures would have been impossible without the warming that we have experienced already. So human-caused climate change has already affected the likelihood of that event, but it was also exceptional for several other reasons that we are kind of currently trying to understand. The climate system is complex, and things that are happening in one part of the world tend to affect other parts of the world. So we're actually there's studies coming out almost every month about the different factors that contributed to that event that made it really exceptional. And one of the studies that came out from one of the projects that I'm working on was that the drought actually kind of facilitated, made the severity of that heat wave much worse than it would have been. And so it's kind of an interesting interaction between multiple hazards that we are experiencing right now. And the way we can look at how are these events going to change in the future, we have really complex climate models that are basically physics-based models. They are simulating all the complex processes that are happening in our climate system. And we can use that to see what happens in the future under different scenarios of socioeconomic development. So if we choose if we can choose to continue the way we are on this like fossil fuel dependent pathway, we can look at how the likelihood of these events will change. And we can also look at what would happen to these kind of events using these models. We can look at what would happen to these kind of events if we kind of decide to shift towards a more renewable and sustainable energy pathway. So we have these climate models that we can use to see, well, how often are these extreme events going to happen in the future under different scenarios.
Great, thank you so much. And question for you. So you're in anthropology. Talk to us a little bit about the connection between your research and anthropology, and then also how directly folks, residents in the state of Washington, if they're utilizing the app, their connection to it.
Yeah, thanks for that. So as an anthropologist, I'm really interested in for me personally, connections between people. That's what my area of interest is. So how do people build social relationships? Under what conditions do those form, and how do they help us with things like, for example, our well-being and our health in the context of climate change? And so as an anthropologist, having a platform like this could be really powerful. Not only does it increase our engagement with communities as scientists, which oftentimes is lacking, but additionally, it enables us to actually kind of be part of those interactions as they're happening, to understand them better and to work with communities to figure out what would be best for them in terms of what they would like to see happen and how we can support that. And so to me, this app dovetails really nicely with a lot of the foci, both of anthropology and of WSU as a land-grant university as well. In terms of stakeholders in Washington, so the app hasn't been released yet, right? So it's still in prototype phase. So mostly just something you can play with on your computer screen rather than something you can have on your phone. But there's been a really positive response to it from the folks we have talked to. So we've talked to farmers, we've talked to climate activists, we've talked to members of the community who are working in agriculture, oftentimes who are going, day to day to different jobs, who have tenuous employment situations. And a lot of folks are finding space in their lives for this app. One of the key features that we've heard about from stakeholders that we're implementing is we're actually putting weather in the app as well. So it can be just really one stop for everything climate related. So you can come onto the app and see your 10-day forecast and see your hourly forecast for today, in addition to being able to have conversations about how you're responding to the actual conditions now. So it's been really fun to talk to folks from across Washington from what they would like to see in this app, and then actually help to make that happen.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. We are almost out of time, but there is just one more question that I have to ask because it's such a great question. And Gary, I think I'm gonna give it to you if you can answer in just about 30 seconds. But it's such a great question. What would you encourage young people to take hope in and take action about?
So I would just say there's lots of room to participate, get involved, talk about it, and talk to us at WSU. We'd love to engage our young people. We want to have them involved in all of our research initiatives.
Great, thank you so much. I want to thank all of our speakers this morning, our amazing researchers, Dr. Piser, Dr. Ferguson, Dr. Singh, Dr. Richards. Thank you so much for sharing your research as it relates to climate change and health with us here at WSU and across the state. And I know folks tune in from all over the nation to join us with the Wake Up with Research. So thank you so much. I want to just let others know if we didn't get to your question, we'll be sure to send it to one of our panelists here so that they can touch base with you after. Let's see, I want to just remind everyone that we will have Wake Up with Research in March. It's going to be a little bit different though. So in March, we're going to be in person. So our goal for Wake Up with Research this year was to do a few virtual, a few in person. So this one's going to be in person, and it's going to be connected to two other events. So on March 23rd, We are going to have the Inland Northwest Research Symposium, where we'll have all of our faculty and students here that are interested to present their research in poster format. We'll have a keynote speaker, and then we're going to go right into the STEER Endowment Lecture, where we're going to screen a documentary. It will be available hybrid as well, a documentary on the opioid epidemic, in particular as it focuses on women lost to the opioid epidemic. We'll have a panelist and we'll have a dinner here on campus as well. So please be on the lookout for information about that. Again, please feel free to reach out with any questions. I want to thank all of you, the panelists again, our guests for joining us this morning for Wake Up with Research. Have a wonderful day. Stay healthy and safe. Vamos Cougs, go Cougs.